It's funny, isn't it? We're always wishing we had more time, but then you start thinking about time travel, like actually speeding time up.
Yeah. It really makes you think about, like, how we view time.
Right. Like we want more of it, but do we really want to mess with it?
Yeah.
So to dig into all of that, we're looking at this podcast discussion called Fast Forward or Rewind, Debating Time Travel.
Ah,
Yes.
from Time Warp Talks.
Yeah, exactly. And they had these two friends on, Alex and Sam, really going back and forth on this whole idea.
It was a really interesting dynamic, actually, because you had Alex, who's kind of the dreamer, always pushing the boundaries, and then Sam, who brings in that skeptical, grounded perspective.
Yeah, I like that it's kind of like the two sides of our own brains when we think about time travel. That desire for control, but also that, oh man, what if we screw things up?
Feeling
Feeling.
totally. So I guess the first big question is, can we even control time in the way we imagine? Like, could we actually speed it up if we wanted to?
Right, like is that even remotely possible?
Well, Alex starts off by suggesting we kind of reframe how we think about time. They propose that maybe, instead of this rigid line, it's more like a river that's constantly flowing.
I see. So we're always moving forward, but what if we could, like, change the speed of the current?
Exactly. But Sam jumps in pretty quickly with some, physics, reminding us that time, like space, is a fundamental dimension. There are laws.
So no teleporting across a room, you actually have to walk through space. Okay, point for Sam. But let's say, just for fun, that we could find a way to mess with our experience of time. Wouldn't it be tempting to just skip over all the boring parts?
Yeah, yeah. Alex actually talks about that. Like, imagine being able to speed through those long meetings or rush hour traffic, all those times you're just like, ugh, get me out of here.
Oh, I would use that power so much. But wouldn't there be, like, consequences? Our bodies would still age normally, right?
That's exactly what Sam brings up. They argue that even if our minds think time is moving faster, our bodies are still bound by, biology. No fast-forwarding aging.
Darn. So are we just stuck with time moving at its normal pace? Are there, like, any scientific theories that hint at this whole time manipulation thing being possible at all?
Well, Alex brings up Einstein's theory of relativity, which says that time isn't like absolute. It's relative to the observer. And I think most people have heard of that whole time dilation thing.
Oh, yeah, like astronauts aging a tiny bit slower than people on Earth because they're traveling at super high speeds. Mind-blowing, but is that something we could ever actually use?
That's the million-dollar question. Alex actually wonders if, since we know time dilation exists, maybe we could figure out how to, like, control it, amplify it even, and make it work for us in our everyday lives.
Okay, now that would be amazing, the possibilities. But I'm betting Sam has some thoughts on whether that's even realistic, let alone safe.
You know, Sam. They point out that relativity really only comes into play at speeds that are, well, crazy fast, approaching the speed of light. Not exactly something we could do with our current technology.
Yeah, not gonna be hitting light speed on the way to work anytime soon. Plus, I imagine there's the whole, like, butterfly effect thing to worry about. Changing the past could have some serious consequences, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sam brings up the classic paradox problem. Like, what if you go back in time and accidentally prevent yourself from ever being born? Mind-bending stuff.
The classic grandfather paradox. Okay, so manipulating time isn't just about getting what we want. It's a whole tangled web of interconnected events, and who knows what could happen if we start pulling at those threads.
Right. And that leads us into a whole other area, ethics. Let's say, just hypothetically, we could figure out a way to speed up our personal time safely. Would it actually be the right thing to do?
That's a tough one. Like, on the surface, yeah, speed up time to avoid pain or achieve something faster. Sounds great. But are there downsides?
Alex actually presents this scenario of fast-forwarding through grief or trauma. Seems like it would be a good thing, right? Less suffering.
Yeah, at first glance, that makes sense. But don't we learn and grow from those experiences, even if they're tough?
That's precisely Sam's point. They argue that facing those tough times, as hard as they are, is crucial for how we develop as people. Skipping over them might just stunt our emotional growth or even make us less empathetic.
So it's not just about how it affects us, but how it could impact society as a whole. Wow.
Exactly. Imagine if everyone just fast-forwarded through hardship. Would we even recognize pain in others anymore?
Chilling thought. Okay, so this isn't just about speeding up time. It's about the very essence of what it means to be human.
Right. And that brings us to another big one that Alex brings up, productivity. What if we could apply this time acceleration to our work?
Oh, I see where this is going. Like, imagine finishing a project in a day that normally takes a month. or getting 10 years worth of work done in 1 year.
Exactly what Alex proposes, but of course Sam has to chime in with a little reality check. They question whether all that speed would actually lead to, real mastery.
Right, like could you really learn something deeply if you just zip through it?
That's Sam's argument. They say that sometimes the slow, steady process is what leads to true understanding and skill. It's like rushing through a good book, you might miss all the nuances.
It makes sense. It's not just about getting things done faster, it's about the quality of what we create and learn along the way. And I think that leads to an even bigger question. Would speeding up time actually make things more equal for everyone, like Alex suggests? Or could it just make things even more unfair?
Oh, that's a good one. How would this impact society as a whole? I'm eager to hear what both Alex and Sam have to say about that.
Me too. And that's exactly where we'll pick things up in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned because we're just getting started.
So picking up where we left off, that whole idea of time acceleration being good for the environment really got me thinking.
Yeah, it's a really intriguing concept. Alex makes a pretty compelling case, doesn't it? Like, if we could just speed up time, we'd be using resources faster, but also getting through them faster.
Yes, exactly. Less time driving, less energy used, less waste produced in a way. Right. It sounds like a pretty neat solution to some of our environmental problems.
Right, at least on the surface. But of course, Sam has to bring us back down to Earth. They remind us that, well, the planet isn't speeding up along with us.
Right. It's not like the Earth's rotation is suddenly going to get faster just because we're perceiving time differently.
Exactly. So we'd still be depleting resources, just at a much faster rate from our perspective.
Exactly. And even if we could somehow speed up time for, like, the entire planet, which is a whole other can of worms, there's the question of whether our technology could even keep up.
That's a really good point. I hadn't even thought about that. What kind of challenges are we talking about?
Well, think about it this way. If we could speed up time tenfold, right, we'd basically be using 10 years worth of resources in a single year. But could our renewable energy sources, like solar panels and wind turbines, keep pace with that kind of demand?
I see what you mean. And what about waste management? Could our systems handle 10 times the volume of trash in the same amount of time?
Exactly. It's not just about speeding up human activity. It's about making sure the systems that support us can handle that accelerated pace. It gets very complicated very quickly.
It's like we'd be creating a whole new set of problems while trying to solve the old ones.
And that seems to be a recurring theme when we talk about time manipulation, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Good intentions, but unforeseen consequences.
Yeah, like messing with a delicate ecosystem. You never know what kind of ripple effects you might trigger.
Speaking of ripple effects, remember that whole discussion about fast-forwarding through history?
Oh, yeah. The idea that we could just skip over all the wars, the pandemics, all the bad stuff, and get to a better future faster. It's tempting, isn't it?
It's definitely appealing on the surface, but as you might have guessed, Sam has some pretty strong opinions on that.
I can only imagine. What's their take?
Well, they make this really interesting argument about how history, even with all the terrible things that have happened, is full of valuable lessons. We've learned so much from those difficult periods.
So they're saying that trying to erase those parts of history might actually do more harm than good?
Exactly. Sam believes those dark chapters, those periods of struggle and hardship, actually forced humanity to innovate, to adapt, and ultimately to progress.
So even though it might be painful to look back on those times, they've actually shaped who we are today.
Right. And without those experiences, who knows if we'd have made the same advancements in medicine, technology, social justice, you name it.
Wow. It makes you think about those what-if scenarios, doesn't it? What if we had never faced those challenges? Would we be better off or worse off?
Tough to say, right? And that kind of brings us to a more philosophical question about the nature of time itself.
Oh, here we go. Getting deep. I like it.
Well, it's unavoidable with this topic, isn't it? Alex, true to form, sees time as this force for growth and evolution. And they believe that by speeding up time, we could potentially speed up our own development as a species.
So like a fast track to enlightenment. I can see the appeal.
Right. But Sam, ever the pragmatist, argues that the limitations of time, those constraints, actually give our lives meaning and purpose.
Interesting. It's like maybe those limitations are what force us to make choices, to prioritize, to really appreciate the time we have.
Exactly. And that maybe true fulfillment comes from embracing the journey, even the slow parts, rather than trying to rush through to the end.
It's a good reminder that sometimes the most valuable things in life take time to develop.
And that brings us back to that idea we were talking about earlier. control over our temporal experience.
Ah, yes. Maybe the key isn't to speed up or slow down time, but to learn how to be more present in each moment.
Precisely. And both Alex and Sam actually agree on that point. They believe that the real power lies not in manipulating time externally, but in mastering our own internal experience of it.
I love that idea. It's about being intentional with our time, regardless of whether it's moving fast or slow, choosing how we want to experience it.
Exactly. And that leads us to the ultimate question. Who gets to decide? If we were to develop technologies that allow us to manipulate time, would it be a matter of individual choice, or would there need to be some kind of societal regulation?
Wow, that's a huge question, and one that I think will keep us all pondering for quite some time. But it's a conversation we need to have.
Absolutely. And it's one that we'll continue exploring in the final part of our deep dive.
Welcome back. It feels like we've gone down so many rabbit holes in this deep dive, but in the best way possible.
I know, right?
Yes.
Every time we think we've got a handle on this whole time manipulation thing, another layer pops up. It's a lot to wrap our heads around.
It really is. So for this last part, I'm kind of hoping we can zoom out a little. What does it all mean? How does this impact how we see ourselves and our place in the universe? Big questions, I know.
The best kind of questions, in my opinion. And it's actually something that Alex and Sam get into in that Time Warp Talks episode.
Yeah.
It goes beyond just, can we do it, and into should we territory.
Exactly. Because, yeah, it's cool to think about the science of time travel, but it gets really real when you start talking about how it could change who we are as people.
Totally. And Alex, always the optimist, they actually propose this idea that time acceleration could be a tool for, personal growth and self-discovery.
Hold on, speed up time to grow as a person. How does that work?
Well, their thinking is that if we could speed up time, we can essentially fast track our development, achieve things in way less time than it would normally take.
So, instead of years of practice to master a skill, you could do it in a few weeks. Sign me up.
Right. But of course, Sam has to play devil's advocate a bit.
Yeah.
They ask, okay, but would that really be true mastery?
Good point. Is it really learning if you're just skimming the surface?
That's exactly Sam's argument. They say that sometimes that slow, steady progress is what really allows us to understand something deeply. They use the example of reading a book versus watching the movie.
Ah, yeah, I get it. You might get the gist from the movie, but the book lets you really savor every detail.
Exactly. And Sam applies that to personal growth too. Rushing through experiences might get you to the finish line faster, but you might miss the nuances, the depth, the stuff that really makes it meaningful.
So it's not always about the destination, right? Sometimes the journey is just as important.
And that kind of circles back to that whole control over our temporal experience thing we were talking about before.
Yeah.
Maybe the real benefit of understanding time isn't about manipulating it externally, but internally.
Learning how to be more present, even when things feel chaotic or slow, that's a skill I think a lot of us could use right now.
For sure. And it speaks to something both Alex and Sam agree on. The true value of time isn't in how much we have, but how we use it.
Whether we're trying to speed it up, slow it down, or just be more mindful, it's about making conscious choices. Recognizing that time is precious.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into the wild world of time manipulation.
Time flies when you're having fun, huh? But before we go, I think we should leave our listeners with something to chew on. A question to spark some more thinking.
Oh, I like that. What if we ask them, if you could control your own personal time, how would you use it?
Would you fast forward through the rough patches? Slow down to savor the good times? Or maybe try to find some kind of balance? It's something to think about.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. We hope you learned something new, or at least had your mind stretched a little.
And who knows, maybe someday we'll be back to revisit this whole time travel thing. Until then, keep exploring and keep questioning.